All right. All right, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to another Wednesday night of Black Health. Let's talk about it. My name is D.Moss. I'm on my co-host Justin Yarde. And our guest today is Dr. Tell me if I say it wrong, Shailise Ross.
Yes, that's right.
Did I mess it up?
No, you didn't.
All right, cool. So, Justin, I'm going to let you take it. You take the lead. Let's get it out there. You ready? Let's
Yes,
go.
yes. I'm gonna have Shailise Ross kind of give you guys an introduction on who she is, and we're just gonna talk about big pharma today. So there's a lot of misconception about how the pharmaceutical industry works and how drugs get to our CVSs, our pharmacies around the globe. So it's important we get some clarification because our communities are in dire need of understanding how that works. All right. So Shailise, kind of tell people what you do and where you work.
So I work in regulatory affairs for a mid-sized biotech or biotechnology company, which is similar to a pharmaceutical company. So I do specifically I'm a regulatory affairs manager. So we represent the company in liaising with the FDA. So we're responsible for all FDA interactions. And basically, we work cross-functionally within the company, pulling together all the different pieces of a drug program to submit to the FDA, host the FDA meetings, responsible for all FDA interactions. So,
Okay. So when your company comes out with a drug, are they coming out with a drug? Or are they coming out with an ingredient to a drug? How does that work? Like, is your company specified in getting drugs to market, or are they helping other pharmaceutical companies with their kind of ingredients and lab work to get other drugs into market? How does that work?
so no, our company, we specialize in oncology products. So we actually develop oncology drugs that we pull together and market. And so with other, like they're called CROs, companies that will help in the process of getting our drug to market, but we're the sponsors, we're responsible.
Okay. So your job specifically is to help get the drugs into the marketplace for consumer use, correct?
Yes, so we help in all FDA interactions in order to get the drug approved. So, when clinical trial information comes in and, commercial and things like that, we're responsible for submitting it to the FDA, hosting FDA meetings to have conversations about our drug and our drug products in order to get them approved, and then we send them out into market based off of the approval.
So I know a lot of people have a crazy misconception of big pharma, or sometimes people think of misconception, but it could be the truth. How are drugs getting to the market, and like what's the process of a drug getting to the market? And to clarify, oncology people is cancer, right? Correct. All right. That's the biggest. That's huge right now in every community, but specifically the Black and Latino community. So, kind of give us a rundown on the process of getting a drug into our pharmacies and our homes.
So to give kind of like a high level overview, from bench, which is basically from working developing a drug molecule in the lab to getting it to market where it's out in the world to help patients, it's on average a 20-year process. It can take $1 billion or more to create. And so from bench, you move into clinical trial phases. And so you have clinical trial phase 1 through 4. Phase 1 through 3 focuses on safety, like proper dosing, efficacy, whether it's competitive against the standard of care. So what's available on the market now. Phase 4 kind of focuses more on after the drug is approved, what it looks like and how effective it is once it's out in the world, being that you're giving it to hundreds of thousands of people who need it, and so you're able to get a better idea of like potential effects that may not have been captured during clinical trials. But you go through all these different phases and you're consistently interacting with the FDA in specific FDA meetings, or whether they're written responses or questions, answering questions, and just constantly submitting all of your information up until you reach your PDUFA date or your scheduled date for your drug to get approved, unless something goes wrong. Generally, once the FDA sets a date, like that's the date that you get approved. Sometimes you can get approved earlier. They also have different pathways. So the standard pathway, it would take a drug on average, it would take 10 months for the drug to get approved. But there's other processes such as priority review or accelerated approval, which can speed up that timeline so that your drug is approved within 6 months. But in doing that, that's more if it hits an unmet need. So there aren't any drugs on the market that can help those patients that you're focusing on, that that drug targets. And you consistently, so you have a closer interaction with the FDA. So you have more meetings and more back and forth with the FDA if your process is sped up. But that all
Okay.
helps getting it to market faster.
Okay. So let's go through, because from what I understand or what I'm seeing is phase 1 through 3 is really or phase 1 and 2 especially, is that research is getting done, correct?
Yes.
All
So
right.
phase focuses more on the safety, right? You want to make sure that the drug is safe for the patients. And so phase 1, you're figuring out, proper dosing so that you're not overdosing or underdosing, but you want to find that sweet spot, right, where the drug is the most effective. But in doing that, you're solely focused on identifying what's safe, right? And then phase 2 focuses more on the efficacy, so how well the drug works, but it also keeps in mind the safety as well. And so for phase 1, you may have a very small number of patients in that clinical trial. And then phase 2, you may have 100 people in that clinical trial. And then once you get to phase 3, which focuses on your drug um, and a comparator. So whether that comparator is a placebo, because it may not necessarily be something on the market. So you want to see if your drug just works, or you're comparing it against the standard of care that's on the market, and
Okay.
see if your drug is better than the standard of care. And in those, then you could potentially have up to like 1,000 patients in those cases.
Okay. So we're not talking about 30,000, 40,000 patients that are going to be doing the studies to see the effectiveness of the drug. We're talking about under 10,000 usually is that range?
Probably, yeah. Especially when you get to phase 3 is when you have your largest number. But depending on the drug and depending on, the different areas that you're focusing on. So you can have clinical trials that are running for a drug here in the States, and then they may also be running in specific demographics in other countries, right? So you can have
Okay.
thousands of patients.
Okay. And so now what I hear about phase 4, right? And I did a little bit of research, trying to understand big pharma more, right? So phase 4 is really the last phase of the whole process, from what I'm understanding. And that's the process in which they really learn how effective the drug is, correct? And that's when it's on the market, or no?
So they really learn how effective the drug is during the first 3 phases in the clinical trial, right? Because that's how you're able to identify how much you're giving to patients. That's how much, you're able to identify all the serious adverse effects that may happen and things like that. But the difference between those phases versus a phase 4 is that those phases are more in like a controlled environment, right? You may have inclusion or exclusion criteria that may rule certain patients out, where once phase 4 is after the drug is approved, right? So it's on the market. So in that case, there may be certain things that were not present in the clinical study that are present in people in the real world. So because it's out in the world, you're affecting hundreds of thousands of people. So even though you've tried your best to identify all of the potential, adverse effects that either you expected to see and or unexpected results, you never know what you'll see once you hit a much larger population, right? And so phase 4 basically just tracks that to see if anything happens. So even when a drug's out to market, if something comes up that, didn't show up in the clinical trial or wasn't down in the prescribing information or the label that comes with all medications, they give you a number to call the company or call the FDA to let them know that something else has been flagged. So,
Okay. And
yeah.
so with that process, right, you said the word that I think caught my eye the first time I spoke to you. You said billions of dollars. One drug could cost the pharmaceutical company billions of dollars to get into the marketplace, correct?
Yeah, well, not billions per se, but a billion. So you think about, over a 20-year span where you're in the lab for years and all the, scientists that you're paying to help come up with the molecule, all the people that you need, all the collaboration from bench to market, it can cost up to $1 billion or even more to get that drug finally approved and on the market. And so when you think about how often it may seem like drugs come out on the market all the time, but as many as you see on the market, way more fail. And so companies also lose millions of dollars, right, on drugs that fail in phase 1 or phase 2 or even phase 3.
Okay. And so this is just business at the end of the day. You got to recoup that money back, right? And so I think in our community, what we see is that big pharma, because of so much money is being spent on getting that drug to market, and then once that's the market, the marketing that goes into making sure that is in every home that obviously the drug is needed for, right? It becomes scary. Like that's why people are scared. A lot of people are like, their best interest is really to make that $1 million back. You understand? And so, good.
It depends on the company, right? I mean, companies that I've worked for are very patient focused and it's patient first, right? And so, like for instance, I work for an oncology company, so we focus on cancer drugs. So we're not necessarily putting ads on TV to market cancer drugs. The doctors know what drugs are available. Your job is more to let the professionals know what's available so that they know that there's more options for their
You guys
patients.
are B2B. You guys are like business to business.
Exactly. So when you think about the fact that, like, yes, you spend a lot of money on these drugs, and yes, the drugs can cost a lot as well for treatment for patients, but people don't understand that companies also put out vouchers and have other programs that run where if you can't afford it or your insurance doesn't cover it, they'll find ways to try to help you get the drug and not have to pay for it. They also work really hard with insurance companies as well to get insurance companies to cover it, right? That's why it's important for a drug to be considered a standard of care. And in part of doing the clinical trials is seeing how well you do against the standard of care, because whatever is considered the standard has a higher probability of being covered by your insurance,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So it's like, so a lot of companies try to find, yes, they're expensive, and the goal is to get the drug on the market as soon as possible, because the longer it's out there and the faster it's available to help patients who need it, right? Who may not have other options for treatment. Yes, it gets out faster for the patients, but it also gives us the ability to recoup some of that money so that we can put that back into the system to work on other drug products and to work on other treatments for, other patients in other disease areas and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the research side, you know what I mean? I think we have to also understand, in general, pharmaceutical companies benefit off of disease and sickness and famine. You know what I mean? And so I know it's not like, oh, they're terrible, but this is the current state Westernization is in, and the kind of allopathic medicine in America is in, where if there are not as much sick people, we're not going to be pumping out as much drugs, right? So how much research have you seen, or do you know of? Because you have also a degree in biology, right? Or microbiology, is it?
I'm sorry, say it again.
You have another degree in microbiology, correct? Or
Oh,
biology?
well, my degree is in chemistry.
Chemistry, all right. And so how much research have you seen, because you deal with that, have you seen when it comes to, somebody would say alternative medicine, plant-based medicine, or things of that nature? in your company, if you can disclose that? Like if somebody was saying, all right, well, this herb that grows naturally is, we're going to research this and see what compounds we can come up with and how it can help with cancer.
Right. So if I've seen it, I wouldn't be able to disclose it, right? Because that would be covered under like
Oh, it's already been on the market.
But in general, I mean, because I'm more on the regulatory side and I'm not in the lab, I don't see how much research, you know what I mean? Like I'm not in the lab, so I couldn't really speak to it. But I will say that, I mean, it depends on the companies, right? Every company is different. Every company has their own focus. Like I said, mine focuses on cancer products. Other companies, like larger companies, you know, like Roche or things like that, focuses on cancer, but they also focus on the flu, they focus on insulin, they focus on all these other things. So I think it depends on the products. Like obviously there are some diseases that are much easier to solve. And so they may find a cure or better treatment to help get rid of it versus other diseases where, okay, it's a lot harder to find a cure, but we are able to find something that seems to work for the interim, right? And so that's what they put out there. And I think in general that sometimes people have this mindset that, you know, what you said earlier in the sense of like companies, they're just there to put drugs out to get people on drugs and things like that or whatever. And that it's like a capitalist, you know, it's all about the money and things. And I think I understand that mindset, but you also have to look at it as a way of providing other options for people, right? Like some people, you know, they do go to more natural ways of trying to figure things out and finding treatments. But if those natural ways don't work, or for instance, you know, with cancer, which, you know, is very serious and people may try to find other ways. You have chemotherapy, you have radiation, you have surgery, you have homeopathic ways or naturopathic ways of dealing with it. And if those don't work, what's left? Right. And so the goal is to just have something out there for people who have turned to other ways and haven't found anything that works for them. It's about giving more options, right? Especially when you have certain specific cancers or specific disease areas where they're not even being targeted because there's not enough people in the world that has it, where, you know, companies are not able to make enough money for it, enough money back. So they don't focus on those diseases because the cost of trying to work on treatment for those diseases may not necessarily work. But with that being said, and FDA knowing that, FDA has also put out different programs to help companies that focuses on, you know, working on treatments for people who are in smaller groups. So you have something called like the orphan designation, right? And it targets, you know, disease areas that have less than 200,000 people like affected, right? And so for those, then it's like if a company focuses on that, then they get exclusivity. They get, you know, they don't have to pay fees in getting their drug, you know, and submitting it and trying to get it approved for market. So there's different things to kind of help companies, and, you know, it helps society focus on all of the other disease areas that may not necessarily be a focus because there's not a large enough population.
And so when it comes down to it, this current state is big for Big Pharma. You have one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies that teamed up with another pharmaceutical companies, which never happens. I don't know if that happens a lot in the pharmaceutical. Say it again?
Say it again?
We had like a big part of history when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry happened right now during this COVID crisis. One of the biggest pharmaceutical companies that teamed up with another pharmaceutical company, which really, I hear, I'm not in the industry, you can attest to this, never happens, right? When they team up to come up with the COVID-19 vaccine. And I forgot what the company is. It's what is it called again? I forgot the company. One of the largest pharmaceutical companies. I forgot the name, but they just came out with the vaccine, and in October they were supposed to be able to pass phase 3, which is basically the last phase before it gets to market. Now, for me, you know what I mean? Not saying I'm a potential consumer of that drug, but COVID has only been here for a year, right? And so you would also explain to me you can get your process expedited. There's a program with the FDA where you can get your process expedited. And so now this vaccine is going to be on the market most likely. It's looking like they say in December, January, right? And so for me, what I saw from the stats was less than 7% of the population that was a part of their group for the vaccine were African Americans, right? But now this vaccine that's going to be put in professional situations where it's going to be mandated that you get the vaccine or you can't go to work. People are going to be getting this. And so as a professional in the industry, how do you see this current situation and how can you tell people that like don't know anything about the pharmaceutical industry or reassure them that this is going to be something that's good for people? Because me personally, like that's just, I can't see a drug or vaccine coming on the market in less than a year for first of all, and I wouldn't say disease, but a disease basically that has less than a year of kind of research. You know what I mean? Because it's a different type of COVID. COVID's been around for a long time, but this COVID specifically hasn't had that much research behind it.
Right. So I think there's a few things in what you said. On one hand, right, there's clearly an unmet need. It's a novel illness that people aren't familiar with. And so in that sense, it was kind of like an all hands on deck. So on one hand, I'm not really surprised that they've been able to develop something within a year, and doing the research, being that you have tons of companies, large and small, that pivoted and started focusing on trial development and drug development for it. A lot of companies look at the drugs that they already have within their portfolio, right, that they worked on, and look to see if any aspect of what they already have has an effect on it, right? And that's partly why they were able to speed up some of that process. As I was speaking before, and just in the sense of having the unmet need and things like that, you have the accelerated approval processes that can get drugs approved within 6 months, right? And I keep saying it, but you have like the fact that there's an unmet need and there's literally nothing on the market for it. The FDA works with a lot of those companies more closely and have constant communication, or there may be surrogate endpoints. So it may not be a primary endpoint that you would necessarily focus on if it was during a standard process, but you have an accelerated approval for it to get it on the market immediately. But even during that process, it's still in clinical trial, right? They're still testing it. They're still making sure that it's still efficacious, it's still safe. You know what I mean? Different things like that. So
you feel like you're saying that's not outside the norm to happen and be able to get that drug out in 1 year or that vaccine out in 1 year to the people. And
no.
You also see a problem with less than the most affected group of people is African Americans from this COVID, and less than 7% of the people that were in the trials, the clinical trials, are African American. You mean how can somebody be prepared with that?
So that's another aspect, right? And so yes, less than 7%, as you say, are participating in clinical trials. In general, African Americans, Black people, people of color don't really participate. So those numbers have always been low when it comes to clinical trials. And a lot of that, I've attended some different like FDA meetings and things that they have, which are on their website. So a lot of their programs, anybody can attend and listen in and like hear what they talk about. But they talk about, the trust that the Black community has and why we don't necessarily volunteer to participate in clinical trials and things like that. And so, but we also know that the reason that COVID or the coronavirus affects a larger population of Black and Latinos is not because we're more susceptible. It's because we do more of the frontline work, right? We do more of the blue collar work. So we have jobs, we have the essential jobs that put us out there. So we're not more susceptible. We're just at risk more because we're the ones that are out there. You see what I mean? So,
Yeah.
but I will say, on the plus side, the fact that all these companies are focusing and trying to get different treatments out there, it gives people options. So if one doesn't work, you have something else, like you do with allergy medicine or you do with flu vaccines.
Okay. But yet, and still, that's still a huge portion to really think about when it comes to when this vaccine gets released. Another thing that I really wanted to bring up was, I think you said, I forgot what it was called, but basically there was something signed, I believe, in 1992, which basically got pharmaceutical companies to pay the FDA. And basically what it did was help the FDA get a lot more help when it comes to the process of releasing drugs into the market. And
Yes.
so, controversially speaking, for me, an outsider that's not in the industry, basically what they're saying is that that's nepotism at its worst. You know what I mean? Not even nepotism, that's just straight. That would look like corruption from the outside looking in. You know what I mean? And kind of explain how that goes, but basically, that program was basically the pharmaceutical companies paying the FDA, which are the actual regulatory system for them. So if they're paying them, that would look like there was some corruption going on there. But explain that system and what went down with that.
So that program is called the PDUFA fee program. And so basically anytime a company submits, their filing application to the FDA for review, you have to pay a fee, right? And so that fee doesn't solely just pay for your drug. The FDA already has their own government funding, but they worked out an agreement with private industry or the private sector to have that fee to help support the FDA in reviewing, the applications. Just because you submit it doesn't mean your drug will get approved, because you still have other guidelines that you need to follow, right? Like you have to have, the drug has to be safe, it has to be efficacious. There's ICH guidelines, there's international guidelines that we, adhere to and things like that. And so I definitely see that perspective of like, you're paying to get your drug reviewed, so obviously it's going to get approved. But no, it's just, it works out in a way where it's like, okay, you have all these companies that are submitting drugs, but we don't have the manpower. The only way we're able to get the manpower is if we have the funds to properly review the information. The FDA, you have people of all different backgrounds that focus on specific areas of your filing application. And anytime if there's issues with your filing application, they'll put you on a clinical hold. If there's issues with your marketing application, you may go through the entire process and your drug doesn't get approved at the end, or you may get an accelerated approval and your drug gets on the market, and then you finish your clinical trials and your drug fails and your drug is withdrawn from the market. So even though you're helping the FDA in a sense of, helping them with their workload by providing additional funds so that they're able to guarantee that they have to review, your drug filing within a certain amount of time. So it helps speed up that process, being that you have more hands on deck and you have more funding to get that done. You know what I mean? Because if they didn't have the funding, instead of it taking 10 months to get a drug approved, it could take 2 years, right? But the extra money that comes in to support the FDA, it's a 10-month timeline, and they stick to that 10-month timeline. So that's considered like your PDUFA goal or your PDUFA date, right? The date that the FDA tells you that your drug will either get approved, or you'll find out whether it's approved or not approved at that time.
Okay. So yeah, that's one of the things that I know, that if somebody ever got that public information, that's public information that's on the FDA website, and kind of tells you how that process goes. But since that's been passed, still, even though it makes sense, there's been an 80% increase, they say, on how many drugs get approved. Obviously, because now you have more staffing to help that process as well. Another thing that I think that people need to understand as well is that when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry, there's international companies. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people think like it's just American companies, but most of the top pharmaceutical companies are actually outside of the United States, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's companies that are based internationally, and then they have U.S.
Offices in the US,
based,
yeah.
you know, headquarters here, so they're able to work. But a lot of times, especially when you think about our standard or like the EU standard, EMA, are very pretty strict and stringent, right, for drugs to get approved. So a lot of smaller regions, that aren't necessarily part of the EU or the US, they have they get they look at that as like an example. So a lot of companies focus on getting approval within the EU or the US first, and then if other regions see that it's approved there, it may make that process a little bit easier because there's more restriction within those areas, right?
Mhm. So that's good to know. And we should have went into some of the history of just the medical industry because why Black people mistrust it. And there's a long list from the Tuskegee Airmen to Margaret Sanger and the eugenics movement, which is people don't understand. This is the 1972 was the end of the Tuskegee Airmen and the trials that they did on them. You know what I mean? The eugenics movement and Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood is still alive today. You understand? And the taking women, Black women, and making sure they were infertile was their primary goal. And that's actually, she's been quoted to say that. So when we come to pharmaceuticals, this is what, only like probably pharmaceutical industries with a 60-year history. And in that history, we have been dealt the wrong card on multiple occasions because of multiple reasons. One, that they just don't think our lives are really worth anything. Another thing is that they believe we can take more pain. Another thing is at the end of the capitalism, we are at the lowest of the totem pole when it comes to capitalism and releasing these drugs and things of that nature. But it's important for people to know that they're, granted, you're given a lot of good information on kind of debunking some of the stereotypes about big pharma. There's still a history that Black people have to understand is there, and also whether people in the industry or not realize that's what you call recent history. 1972,
Is
you know,
recent.
that was yesterday. That's
Right.
your parents. You know what I mean? And then as well as Margaret Sanger still having Planned Parenthood. And we have people like Bill Gates, who is leading the charge when it comes to the vaccines and the vaccination, the global vaccination crisis, as they say. You know what I mean? And so he's leading the charge with no degree in science at all. He never went to med school. And he's leading the charge, and we're using him as a spokesperson to get a global vaccination schedule, which in large part is very dangerous, in my opinion, from the information you just told me. You know what I mean? You have billions of people in the world, and then you have hundreds of countries with different standards of health, right? And different biologies. And so what's going on now is the globalization of vaccinations when it comes not only to COVID, but also to the flu vaccine and other vaccinations. And there's this they're trying to release a schedule. And so as a professional watching Bill Gates, right, watching and knowing the history of the Tuskegee Airmen, knowing Margaret Sanger, and the list goes on. There's a whole bunch of different situations in which we were dealt the bad hand. How do you see them being able to move forward from that? Like you have such a dark history. How in 30 years are you able to be like, all right, we're doing the right thing now? Like now we're here. We're being honest with the community. We're giving you guys accurate results and information. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot that also comes with that. And I want people to be able to have both sides of the coin as well. So as a professional, knowing that history, how do you go into the industry like that?
I mean, I think for me, just because I've always, like, my background has always been in science. Like, my undergraduate degree is in chemistry, my graduate degree is in chemistry, and I've only worked in the biotech industry. You know what I mean? Um, I think, when it comes to like Bill Gates and things like that, the way our country is in general is kind of like they give, more power to those who have more money and give that platform to them. And on one hand, that's good in the sense of like, it can help bring certain things up to the forefront because they're listening, like they have a platform that they can use. But then on the other hand, it gives that person a little bit too much power, right? Especially if they're speaking for, a demographic or a group of people or a community that they really have no information about or experience or understanding of. So it's like a double-edged sword. I think, what was the other part of your question? Or your
Knowing the history, how can somebody, like, how can you come in knowing that history, and how can that history be erased when that was only like maybe 30 years ago? How do you feel about that history and going in that industry?
I mean, when I went to the industry, it was out of my love for science and just wanting to be helpful. And so that's why I feel like the companies that I choose to work for are companies that put patients first, and in how they do things. You know what I mean? They move with integrity, and they care about the people that work for them, and they care about the people that they affect. Um, I think that you see that as we move forward as a society, you see like the FDA and the ways that they try to, get that information out there because of that history, knowing that, you have Black people and other people of color that don't trust the government because of the things that they do, that they try to make an effort with different programs and things now to be as transparent as possible, right? So developing websites that are focused towards the community and explaining how things work and explaining what happens, and just making sure that the information is available, making sure that they know that all these workshops are available, or that all these public meetings are available, or public hearings or advisory committees. For instance, you have drugs where if there's a lot of controversy or a lot of issues with it, the FDA will host these advisory committees, right? Which brings the company to like a public hearing, and the company speak about their drug in the process, and the FDA asks them questions. But then there's also another aspect of that, which is completely public focus, and anybody can come and speak or write and contribute to that conversation. You know what I mean? But I think a lot of this information people aren't privy to. And so in seeing that they are working, that they're trying to, yes, that information is out there, but they're trying to find ways to make people, find it more easily and make people aware of it and things like that. I think that makes it helpful, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be an easy process. Like, our history speaks for itself.
Mhm.
So I think in just how you move, me personally, I feel like when it comes to anything, right? Even with new technology, something new goes on the market. And it's like, that's nice. Let a couple generations go before you invest in it, right? Because,
Mhm.
the first generation of something is like, yes, this is new technology, but there are probably still kinks in it, and things like that. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to drugs, where it's like you work on something new and it's beneficial, and obviously again you want to put something out there so that people have options. So the most vulnerable communities, right, where you have the elderly, the people who are sick, where it's like, okay, you want something out there so that they have something to protect themselves, but then the people who may not necessarily fall in those vulnerable groups, it's like if you are comfortable and if you are healthy enough, right, then you have a little bit more freedom to decide whether or not you want to, move forward with those treatments, or if you want to wait a little bit longer.
Mhm. But it's other countries have a way different standard. You mean America, even in the medical school, pharmacology, right, is a bulk of their studies. Like it's a bulk of their studies for a person that wants to be a medical doctor, physician, physician's assistant, nurse, nurse practitioner, whatever they're going to school for in the medical industry. Pharmacology is the bulk of what they're doing. And so with me, you know what I mean? I'm looking at it like, all right, pharmacology is what you're spending your time on. But as you know, if you go to any pathophysiology book and you understand disease, 90% of the time when they talk about causes for disease, they're probably going to say environmental factors, right? And so the environmental factors are things that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we can change. Those are personal things. Environmental factors can include diet and exercise,
Absolutely.
air quality, household cleaning products, things of that nature. And so when we spend so much time on pharmacology, which is after I got sick, you know what I mean? Like, I got sick. Now I don't know what to do. Now it's chronic, not acute. And now I got to go see my doctor for an intervention management of this disease.
Right.
When you ask the doctor, how much time do you spend on nutrition? And I don't want to I got 3 doctors in my family. I'm not going to put them out there or anything like that. 2 are in oncology. And I had asked, how much time do you spend on nutrition? And they said, I don't know anything about nutrition.
Right.
So, and this is where I'm at. Not saying that this is how it should be. I'm right, because there's a space for pharmaceuticals. You know what I mean? When you need an IV, you need an IV. When you need certain drugs that are in emergency situations, you need those drugs, and you're happy to have them. You know what I mean? So these are some of the questions that I know our community has and spoke to me, like, why are doctors only spending so much so much time on nutrition, right? And then on pharmacology, there's so much time spent on pharmacology. And then obviously now the pharmaceutical industry is $1 trillion industry globally. And for us, in our benefit, if we look at disease, and disease is saying it's environmental factors, let's try to change that. And I think the narrative for us has to be prevention and not intervention. Because I think where pharmaceuticals come in, that's intervention, that's management of disease. And then we need to focus on, in our community, prevention, right? And I don't know how you feel about that. If you can give some words on like how you feel on how we should start as a community preventing it, or do you think that the place should be in the time and money and be spent on pharmacology and the pharmaceutical industry?
I mean, I think it's important to be aware of both sides. I think, but obviously you want to go with prevention, right? Like you want to figure out what you can do now so that you don't have to get to that point, right? So it's like, what can I do to take care of my health? Whether it's like you said, whether it's exercising, whether it's how I eat, what I eat, you know what I mean? How do I choose to like what activities do I choose to participate in? Some people smoke cigarettes, some people drink a lot, some people, some things are okay with in moderation, some things are better to just do strictly without, but everybody has their thing that they enjoy and they know it's bad for them and they still do it. So I think in general, like you want to focus on ways that you can prevent anything, because it's better to prevent and never really have to deal with it and maintaining that prevention than it is to have to deal with it on the back end. But on the other side of that coin, right, is that it's still important to know what to do if, like, people are going to be people. Some people don't care about, their health, or they don't take it, or not that they don't care about it, but they don't take it that seriously, right? Like there's plenty of grown people who walk around talking about they still don't eat vegetables and they think that's completely fine, or, you know what I mean? They don't necessarily cook at home, or they don't necessarily try to, you know what I mean? Like they just live a fast food diet and a fast food life. And maybe because of how their body is, they may feel like it doesn't affect them. But whether you're skinny or not, like you can still be unhealthy regardless. Right. And so I think, obviously, like I said before, you want to focus on the prevention side, but you also want to be aware with what's on the other side. And then a lot of it has to do with individual people and what they choose to focus on, right? Which is why you have dietitians and you have nutritionists, but then you have the people who focus on the
You
other
have them.
side.
I don't know what they're doing, but you got dietitians and nutritionists, and
Right.
that's the whole. That's the same industry. That's still, and they still go to the same medical schools and system. So that's. But keep going. Yeah, that's.
And I mean, even with that, it's still like finding people that work for you, right? Like you can go to a doctor's office and it's like, yes, they're just as qualified as the next person, but they don't listen to you, right? They're only pushing for you to take medicine and they're not giving you other options on ways that you can, naturally reduce certain things before, you have no other option except to go on medication, right? And so it just depends on the doctor. And it depends on, what's important to you. I mean, there's, as much as you speak about health and prevention, there are plenty of people who are fine with how they live their life. And when something happens and they're like, then I'll just take a pill for it. And they're completely comfortable with that, right? And then you have people who are the complete opposite. So, I mean, it's not good. And I think in general, you want to start from a younger age and highlighting the importance of prevention and taking care of yourself. I think as a society, we definitely may not have really not that we didn't understand the importance, but maybe we didn't necessarily understand how much, environmental factors actually affect us. Right?
We knew. You know why I say that is because when you look at, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of spying as America. We do a lot of research on understanding other cultures and other peoples. And if you look at research, life expectancy for people over a certain age, and I'm going to use this as a general marker, over the age of 25 in other industrialized nations is much higher than America, which we told ourselves to be the standard of health. And all encompassing, that's not necessarily true because of many other factors, but we know, we look at disparity research, we look at you're in pharmaceuticals, so you see the numbers. And I think another thing that people want to talk about, which another question I was going to ask you about, was a lot of people talk about side effects, right? When we get into drugs, we got to worry about the side effects and getting drugs for the side effects. And then the side effects are the cousins of the side effects. They got to get drugs for them cousins. And so we got all that, the cocktail of drugs. So how can you put people at ease, or is there any ease with that? Or is that just how the game goes?
I don't know. I think it's hard, right? Like you said you broke up a little bit, so I don't know if I heard everything you said. But I don't know. I mean, when you look at what's going on right now in society, right? It's like we know better, but the people in power won't do better and intentionally go out their way to, you know, interfere in the processes of us trying to do better. And so I think, to your point, it's like there's certain aspects where it's like you do know, and there's certain aspects where it's like, yes, the research is done, people do know, but it's like, but the people who are in a position to affect that change and highlight the importance of it, are they doing that? You know what I mean? And so I think sometimes that's really what it comes down to. And that's why I say, like, it's like, yes, we know things, but as a society, it's been more recent that, okay, we're taking serious how much environmental factors actually have an impact on our health. And as a society, now you're the people, who were in power before. I don't know about now. But it's like how they're trying to affect change in certain things, like removing certain things from our food, or, you know, what I mean, making it more knowledgeable and making it more accessible. So I don't
And
know.
then I also asked you about,
Comes from, right?
yeah, and I also asked you about the problem and issue of the side effects related to the drugs. So a lot of people are asking about like side effects. So especially in oncology and cancer, like
Right.
people don't understand what chemotherapy means. Chemotherapy is basically chemical therapy. So it could be a wide range of things when they talk about chemotherapy. It could be anything when you talk about chemotherapy, but the side effects related to those drugs. And how can somebody be at ease with that, because of the fact that when they get the side effects, they have to take drugs to kind of manage those as well. How can somebody in your industry, how can you help somebody and explain to them how that works, and how they can kind of be at ease or not?
I mean, I think, I look at some of the side effects myself and I'm just like, that's crazy, right? But you look at that from the perspective of somebody who is healthy, and you see a drug and you see all the side effects and you're like, that's crazy. I would never take that. But you have to look at it from the perspective of somebody who is suffering from that disease and their quality of life is terrible. And they may think, like, yes, these side effects are not great, but I'd rather deal with those than have to live my life dealing with whatever disease, disorder, or illness that I'm dealing with now, right? And that's why I was saying, when you look at like the benefit risk, um, it's weighing that benefit risk. And it's funny because I just attended a workshop that was going on. Well, I attended a conference, and one of the talks was talking about, what benefit risk looks like for like a company or for a large population of people versus what that benefit risk looks like for an individual person, right? So for as a company or as looking at a group of people or decision makers, it's like, okay, yeah, you have these certain side effects, but if it gets rid of this disease and it's temporary, then it's fine, right? But somebody who may be suffering from it, or like as an individual, there may be certain aspects of their life where they're like, I don't want to go through that. And if it's not going to really, if there's not like a high enough chance that it's going to actually help me get over this, then I'm fine doing without. You know what I mean? And so I think it's just evaluating what works for different people. But that's also why you have companies who, like, yes, you have chemotherapies, which chemotherapy isn't a targeted therapy, right? It's like when you get chemo, you're just pumping it into your system and it's killing the good with the bad, right? And that's why you have such strong side effects. But, to my earlier point, it's like, but if you have somebody who's suffering from cancer and it's like, it's the difference between life or death. It's like, well, I rather try it, kill the cancer, suffer these side effects. If it kills the cancer and eventually I'll recover. You know what I mean? And you look at it as like, this is just temporary. But you have other companies like the company that I work for is the same in the sense of like, we focus on targeted therapy. So, ways where the drugs focus solely on the tumor, the cancer tumor, and it doesn't affect the rest of your system. So it only kills the cancer cells, or maybe only focus on that specific area, may be at risk, but the rest of your system is fine, you know? And so like those are ways to kind of like get around some of the side effects that, that are much heavier to, a heavier burden than others, right?
And so one time, right, since we're really on that topic of understanding the drug, long story short, there was an allergenist, and allergenist works with allergies, and a large portion of their patients are getting flu shots, right? And that's the bulk of what they do during most of the winter seasons, fall, stuff like that. And when he got the flu shot, he didn't actually know what was in it. And so there's a gap. They understand pharmacology, but they really don't understand. Do you feel like doctors really understand the drugs they're administering? I know they go to conferences to understand the drugs, they get the research also, but do you think, because now we have a big thing with physician's assistants, and not saying they're amazing, you know what I mean? They're doing amazing work, and I'm not going to sit here and doubt them at all, but they're the aides to the doctors in a sense, but
right.
Are they getting the information? Do they have the necessary information to be able to give somebody a drug because they might have migraines, so they have to give them this epilepsy drug that, you know what I mean? Like, do they know the drugs as well as you do? Because it gets on the market and then they're administered to their patients.
Well, I mean, I think doctors or people or healthcare providers who stay up on their knowledge and things like that, like they should know, right? You have the education, you know the terminology, you're familiar with the area that you specialize in and or other areas, and you should be certified and you should be able to, you know what I mean? Like as a doctor, like you're practicing medicine, or as a healthcare provider, like you're practicing. And so part of that is the responsibility that you're staying on top of the knowledge and you're constantly making yourself aware. Right. And I mean, but at the end of the day, everybody's responsible for themselves, right? And it's like, but healthcare providers, you work with a level of integrity that you're doing exactly what you say you're going to be doing, just like your responsibility is to take care of patients, right? And to know. And so when it comes to when drugs come out, like, yes, they may not necessarily be out on the market yet, but doctors attend conferences. There are plenty of conferences that focus on specific disease areas, and researchers in private sectors, they do poster presentations, they do, seminar talks where these healthcare providers can ask questions. They explain the research, they explain the clinical trials. When you get the actual prescribing information, you know what I mean? All of that information is there. The doctor should be doing that research. Companies, they speak with healthcare providers. They literally set up meetings to focus on these conversations with key opinion leaders and healthcare providers to get that information. And so I think, that's part of the job, is that you take on that responsibility to have that knowledge and to have that education. And if you're a doctor or you're a healthcare provider that chooses not to do that and still decides to, push things out, then that doesn't really sound like you're necessarily focused on patients first, right? Because that means you're just giving things just to give it and not really looking at whether that's beneficial to your patients.
And we have a lot of older doctors, you know what I mean? They're not getting continuing education. They're not really learning. And this is what I'm hearing from people. Like, they're not really learning the new drugs or the new research that's out there. And so that's something that people also have to understand. And I'm on the other side of the coin, where they have to understand that their doctor has a responsibility and should, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are educating themselves on the drugs they're administering, and also not even drugs they're administering, but drugs they've not heard of, or new treatments, or new, because if you think about it, alone, immunology is a very young study, which is the study of the immune system, I guess, right? You would call that, right? And so that's so young. And vaccine is in direct correlation with that, understanding how the body works when it's met with a foreign pathogen. So now we're releasing drugs. Granted, we have to save the people, 100%. You know what I mean? We're releasing drugs in an area of healthcare and study that is young. And we're not, our doctors need to be up on this information, they need to be, but they're not mandated to. It's not like teachers where they have continuing education credits and things like that.
Doctors do have continuing education, and they do have to earn continuing education credits to move forward with a lot of things. You know what I mean? And if they don't, then that's a problem. But I think but that's any industry, right? Like, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. It's the whatever career path you focus on. It's kind of like part of your responsibility of doing whatever you're doing is to continue your education, to stay up to date on what's on the market, especially if you specialize in certain areas, is being privy to what's out there and knowing what your options are, and knowing, you know what I mean, what works for the people that your clients or your patients or whoever you deal with in whatever demographic that you work in, right? Like, if that's what you specialize in, then that's like, you take on that responsibility and knowing that. But I think on the other side of that, then that's where, like, as a patient or as a person, you also want to be privy to certain things and do your own personal education and advocating for yourself. And if your doctors doesn't seem to know, or if you're asking questions and they're not really answering it, then, you know what I mean, then you have to stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself and get a second opinion, or change doctors if you don't feel like they necessarily have your best interest. And I mean, I think, and everybody's had some experience somewhere where you express a concern and you feel like that person isn't listening to you and they're just providing a solution. And it's like, how can you provide a solution to something and you're not even listening to what the problem is? And nobody knows me better than I know myself. So you can't tell me about myself if you're not listening to what my concerns are, or actually looking at me, right? And so I think the other side of that, like I said, is just like, as an individual, you having also some responsibility for yourself, and not completely just trusting just because that person is a doctor, just because of whatever, that they necessarily know what's best for you. Like, your gut feeling and certain things that are going on with you are just as important as, their opinion on you and what they think is best for you as well. If that makes sense.
That's where I really want to get down to at the end of the day, because I know we're running out of time. one of the things people have to do is focus on prevention and educating themselves. So is there any places in which they can go to get more information about the drugs that they're going to be receiving, whether they have cancer, God forbid, or any other disease? Where's some place they can go to get more information about the drugs that are public?
I mean, you can always go to the FDA website. The FDA website has, different aspects that are, well, it's public in general. So you can look at any aspect of anything. The FDA always puts out guidances for different things for industry. They put out guidances and stuff for healthcare providers. They put out question and answers. They have different events and things that they put on their website that, as a public, that you can attend to learn more information and things like that. For specific drugs, drug companies, anytime they approve a drug, like almost 100% drug companies create a web page for their specific drug that gives you all the information about it. Like I said, things that may not necessarily, like if your insurance company doesn't cover certain things, a lot of companies offer assistance in providing that drug, right? So I think there's plenty of access and there's plenty of information out there, and I think sometimes the issue is just people don't really know where to look, right? But Google is everybody's friend.
Yeah, very true, very true. And just the trusted sources, and you're saying the FDA is a good place to go to get that information. And that's where I got some of that information and other research as well. So,
and going to those specific company websites. Like most companies, they not advertise, but on their websites, they have information about the drugs that they have approved, right? They advertise or they have information about the drugs that are in their pipeline, that they're on, what disease areas they're focused on, or what they're pushing forward with. I mean, when they attend, you have plenty of science journals, science articles where you can look that information up online and get access to the research articles. A lot of companies work hand in hand with universities or institutions or investigators who do their own individual studies, and then they publish that information in scientific journals and things like that. And a lot of times companies have access or they link to those other investigators, or you're just Googling it, you can find it as well. So I think just people understanding the power of, just looking things up and just going directly to the source for things. That information is all out there.
All right, perfect. So I know we have hit our hour mark, and I know D does like to make sure that we hit that mark. And D, you got any closing statements for the people or questions? Yeah, you're muted. You're muted. Your mic's muted.
I knew that. I knew I was muted. No, I didn't. I think every question that I had in regard to like big pharma, as people call it, I think Dr. Ross. I can say Dr. Ross, right?
Yes.
You earned that title, so I'm gonna say Dr. Ross. I think excellent job answering all those questions. I think you cleared up a lot. You cleared a lot up for a lot of us. There was, we only know what we read in the media. So to have someone come in, a subject matter expert, and actually talk about it and clarify some of that, I think it's really awesome. And I gotta say thank you so much. I turned my camera off. I was like, I'm just gonna sit back and watch. I know absolutely nothing about this. So I've just been sitting here for a whole hour just enjoying the conversation. So thank you very, very, very much.
Yes.
You're very welcome. I'm glad I could be here and participate in the conversation.
And it's crazy. You're like 14 years old and you're a Black woman in the pharmaceutical industry. That makes it even better because people don't want to hear from somebody that don't look like them trying to tell them about the pharmaceutical industry. So it's important that you got a young lady able to explain that and it's in the industry. And again, thank you. Thank you for everybody that's watching. And hopefully people wrote some notes down because these are things that, especially in cancer, you want to be able to go to your doctor with some previous information about your condition and also the drugs related to your condition. Because if you go in there wild, these already know they will bombard you, and you need to be able to be really well suited and booted with information to help make the sound decision for you and your family. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So with that being said, Thank you both. Justin, you know, we got to do this again next Wednesday for all of our viewers. We know people will be watching and sharing this all throughout the week. It starts out slow. By the end of the week, the numbers are through the roof. So, Dr. Ross, again, one more time, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. So, this is Black Health. Let's talk about it. We'll be back next Wednesday. Much love, much peace, much respect. All right, y'all.